and welcome back to another GiantSlayerTV Synergies tier list video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S down to C tier. While the meta has definitely diversified, it's still being dominated by a few specific traits. But overall, there's a good amount of viable synergies to choose from, whether it's for your frontline, carry, or support. So let's dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and starting off the top of the list, we have the S tier. This tier consists of Darkstar, Vanguard, Mystic, Astro, and Sniper. These synergies are exceptional and are likely to be seen in most games. At the top of the S tier is Darkstar. It's likely no surprise to see this synergy at the top of the list, as there weren't really any nerfs that would have lowered the value of the trait or any of the champions. Xerath did lose a bit of priority as a carry, but both Jhin and Shaco are still doing amazing in the meta. Jarvan is also more in line with other one-cost champions, although he's still a valuable asset for Darkstars and Protectors. Really though, the biggest contributor to Darkstar's continued success is definitely Jhin. Jhin is hands down one of the best, if not the best, carries in the game currently. He's just so damn good that he carries Darkstar on his back to the top of the trait tier list. Of course, he's not alone in making the trait good, but it often does feel that way. Beyond the champions we've mentioned, Karma is also played quite frequently as a pair to the carry for a multitude of builds. All in all, the Darkstar synergy is strong, but is certainly made stronger because of the specific champions. Next up, we have Vanguards. Yep, Vanguards are still the best and most common frontline option in the game. This is even more so true after the nerfs to a few of the Protectors, whereas Vanguards have enough champions that any small tweaks won't affect the viability of the trait. Whether it's 2, 4, or even 6 Vanguards, you're going to have a quick and easy way of filling out your front line. We can't talk about Vanguards without mentioning Mystics, right? Technically we could, but the build Vanguard Mystic, while still viable, is not actually as common as it was in the last patch. But where Vanguard dominates the front line, Mystic controls the splash traits. You're almost always going to splash in 2 Mystics for your build, regardless of what you're playing. Not only is the trait amazing, the champions within the trait are also insanely useful. Now, we can move on to Astro. Don't worry, Sniper is right behind Astro because you've likely noticed how immensely popular Astro Sniper is in the current meta. Sure, 4 Vanguard with Sniper is playable and more dominant in certain regions, but as a whole, you're going to see Astro Sniper far more than any other variation. A big reason for this is the synergies just line up so well together. Astro gives you Nautilus, Teemo, and Gnar, which means you get a lot of CC and a great front line with a lot of magic damage. Outside of those 3, there is Bard as well, but he's more of an outlier champion and not really specifically tied to any particular synergy. So yes, you have Astro as one half and Sniper as the other of these pair of awesome synergies. Sniper isn't as impactful as Astro, but it does give you 2 things. 1, more damage. Increased damage is useful, even if it doesn't always get the most value. The second reason is the champions themselves. As mentioned, there's Teemo, who's both Astro and Sniper, but you also get access to the best range carry in the game, Jhin, by going Sniper. Caitlyn is a strong early choice who also gives you Chrono, and Ashe is an amazing backline utility champion with the CC she provides with her ultimate. Combine all of these factors together between Astro and Sniper, and you can see how these 2 traits easily make it into the S tier. Moving right along, we can begin to talk about the A tier. This consists of Infiltrator, Cybernetics, Star Guardian, Protector, Starship, and Paragon. These synergies are above average, and while not quite as dominant as the traits in S tier, they still hold their own against them or are often played alongside them. Infiltrator is at the top of the A tier mainly due to Echo, Fizz, and Shaco. Shaco, of course, is a great carry, but both Fizz and Echo are really powerful champions that you're going to see played in a multitude of builds. Of course, Infiltrators also benefit from Mech Pilot returning to the meta, but honestly, their placement on the list would most likely remain the same regardless. That's just how good Echo, Fizz, and Shaco really are. Since we talked a little bit about Echo, that makes an easy transition into our next trait, Cybernetics. Cybernetics may not do as well as Astro Sniper, and they can struggle against Vanguards, but they are definitely doing well enough in the meta, especially in the early game and into the mid game with the buffs to Lucian. With Lucian returning as a viable early game carry, you're able to smoothly transition into 6 Cybernetics or other builds quite easily. Mixed with the fact that both Aurelia and Vayne can carry, and Echo being a late game beast, it makes this placement an easy choice for Cybernetics. Alright, let's shift gears and talk briefly about Star Guardian. This trait isn't quite as dominant as it was last patch, which is mainly due to the lowered priority of Syndra. She's still a strong carry, but not as commonly played as she was in the last patch. So why is Star Guardian still so high up on the tier list? Because Nico, Janna, and Soraka are absolutely ridiculous when played together. They are such a powerhouse late game combination that can be slotted into several different builds that it makes the value of Star Guardian shoot up into the stars. Honestly, if you haven't tried playing those three champions together yet, we highly recommend that you do. Next, we have Protectors. As mentioned, Nico is great with her Star Guardian friends, so it means you can easily play Protectors with them as well. Outside of that, Jarvan is still doing well early in mid-game, though he definitely falls off compared to the last patch. Overall, the trait isn't as good as Vanguards for your frontline, but the champions themselves really make up for its shortcomings. Nearing the end of A tier is Starship. Aurelion Sol isn't always going to be your go-to late game champion, but in a lot of games, he's going to be. Why? Because he's difficult to kill by being immune to CC, and his fighters draining mana is just so effective. Aurelion is a staple of the meta and likely isn't going anywhere unless he's nerfed heavily. Another one-unit trait is Paragon, which comes in as the last synergy of A tier. It's really just because Janna is so good. As far as the trait itself goes, it's okay. Magic damage can be nice to bypass heavy armor front lines, but overall the actual effect of the trait is completely overshadowed by Janna herself. Let's now move on into the B tier. This will consist of Blaster, Mech Pilot, Blademaster, Chrono, Celestial, Battlecast, Brawler, and Rebel. These synergies are above average in strength, so while they won't always be as strong as the other tiers above them, they're good enough to be played quite frequently. First up is Blaster. Blaster actually got a lot of improvements in 10.15 with buffs to Lucian, Graves, and Jinx. It's really not that dominant of a trait, but Jinx being a viable carry really raises the value of this synergy significantly. There are also times where Kog'Maw and Battlecast make great use of the spread damage of Blaster, so it's not only tied to Jinx, which is a good thing to make it more viable. Mech Pilot is basically the embodiment of average right now in the meta. It can do well and even win games, but it can also flounder and flop to a middle-of-the-road placement. It is worth noting that the trait is significantly more valuable on the Dwarf planet, so look to try playing it there if you find yourself on that galaxy. Blademasters are in a similar boat as Mech. It can carry games specifically with either Master Yi or Zarya carry, but it can easily get a 4th or lower as well. To make Blademasters effective, it requires a fair amount of high rolling in terms of items and champions, which doesn't make it the most consistent in terms of synergies. It may seem weird, but both Chrono and Celestials are about equal in utility as splash traits. Both of them have a place, but neither of them are anywhere as close to useful as Mystic is. Basically, you can play both of these traits in any composition and you'll find success, but their impact has been diminished greatly in recent patches. Battlecast. Battlecast is hard to place right now because it does have a strong build that utilizes it with the reroll 6 Battlecast. And in the early game, it can do quite well, but is it strong enough to rise up in the tier list? As it sits currently, likely not. It's definitely doing better than it has in previous metas, but it's still a trait that struggles to find its footing consistently. We're definitely keeping an eye on this synergy though, as it has potential to rise up in the tier list as the meta continues to evolve. Next, we have Brawlers. Look, Brawlers aren't bad at all, but compare them to Vanguards or even Protectors, and it should be clear why they're in the B tier. By comparison to those other frontline options, they're just really average. That doesn't mean you should overlook them, especially champions like Gnar, Vi, and Blitzcrank, but there's certainly more of a reason to play Vanguards for your frontline instead of Brawlers. And rounding out the bottom of the B tier is Rebel. Rebels have a place in the current meta, but gosh, do they require a hefty amount of high rolling to succeed. 3 Rebels is much easier to commit to, specifically in the early game. But if you're talking about 6, you need a Jinx 2 with good items, a Gangplank 2 to pair with your Ziggs, and a Aurelion Sol 2 just to have a fighting chance against other top synergies. It's definitely not a bad trait, but it for sure struggles a lot of the time to do well. Alright, we are nearing the end of the list with our C tier synergies. This tier consists of Sorcerer, Mana Reaver, Demolitionist, Space Pirate, and Mercenary. These are all below average synergies that only do well in niche situations. Up first is Sorcerer. It may seem odd seeing Sorcerer so far down the list, but hear us out. For starters, yes, they're a great 2-piece splash, but you're not always going to make use of them. The second thing to consider is their carries. Victor is back in the meta, but he does really rely on his other trait to carry. Xerath, he's all about attack speed, so additional damage, while nice, isn't that useful. And lastly, Syndra. Syndra benefits from being able to ramp up, meaning you want her to cast more often, so the sorcerer buff doesn't always matter because the mana is way more important. So basically the bottom line is that splashing 2 sorcerers is good in the right circumstance, but you really don't need this trait for any of its carries. And that's why it's in the C tier. Mana Reaver is really, really good in Cybernetics. Outside of that, it doesn't really exist, and it's the same reason, as usual, there's just not enough relevant meta champions to choose from. You have only Aurelia and Thresh, which are both fantastic options, but not really reliable enough to run together in the majority of builds. Demolitionist overall is an essential synergy in the situations that you want it, mostly with mech, but generally to buff up Gangplank. But honestly, Gangplank is not that relevant of a champion right now, and that really lowers the value of Demolitionist. That said, it's really great for mech, and it's still quite a strong early game trait. So there were buffs to both Darius and Graves for Space Pirates in 10.15. Because of that, the trait is actually playable again in the early game. After that, it falls off as usual. Darius just isn't reliable enough to carry this trait to the mid game, and you're almost never going to hit Gangplank early enough for the 4-piece to be relevant. Until there's some major buffs to Darius or the synergy itself, we're unlikely to see Space Pirates ever become relevant outside of the early game. And the last trait for today's tier list is Mercenary. It's probably not much of a surprise to see it here, considering the previous 2 were also about Gangplank. Despite how poorly it must reflect on Gangplank to have all 3 of these traits at the bottom of the list, it's worth pointing out that he's not terrible. Gangplank mostly suffers from being far too expensive for far too little of a payoff. When played in 6 Rebels or in Mech, he's quite useful and does not only do a good amount of damage, but provides AoE CC. But he needs to be level 2 with good items to really shine. And then, that's where Mercenary comes in. Mercenary just doesn't provide enough for how expensive it is. While each upgrade is okay, it's just a really big investment. That said, its value does hinge on how strong Gangplank is, but given his current capabilities, spending the gold for each upgrade just costs too much. That is going to be all for today's tier list video, folks. Overall, the meta feels quite diverse with a lot of synergies being useful. Let us know in the comment section below if there's any traits you believe should be higher or lower on the list. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future GiantSlayerTV videos.